Hey, what's up? Welcome to Jam the Hype Live, where we help Christian urban artists effectively influence our modern culture to live lives transformed by the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, George Moss. Glad to be here with you today. Got my co-host with me, Cherie. What's up, Cherie?
What's up, y'all?
You feeling good over there? This COVID-19 lockdown that we got happening right now?
You know, I'm becoming acquainted with it. I don't mind not having to get dressed every day. It's great.
Nice. Well, you look like you got your makeup done and everything. You came prepared.
Yes, camera ready.
Good. Well, today, let's talk about living on empty. I had a really good conversation this past week with a friend of mine. That's going to be our host, our guest for today. But actually, when you first think of this idea of living on empty, at least when I first think of living on empty, I'm just reminded of like when I was working at Burger King. One of my first jobs was at Burger King, and I used to try to work there every chance I get. I was trying to like hustle and try to like make money when I was like 14, 15 years old. And the thing is, I worked so many hours at Burger King. Every weekend I was just there to the point where it's like every time I came home, I just smelled like burgers, and it felt like all of my clothes smelled like grease and fries. And outside of work, I didn't even want to step into Burger King. I didn't want to drive by Burger King because you could smell it. Because I was just there so much. And sometimes I think about that when it comes to the grind and stuff that we do when we create art, especially creating art as it relates to ministry. Sometimes you work so hard, you grind so hard to do your thing, like you feel like that's work. And then you go to church or you go to other ministries where you feel like you don't even get recharged when you are at a ministry event or you're at church or something like that, and you feel like you're just always kind of just living on empty because you spend so much time trying to pour out and try to create that nothing really fills you up. And even when you do get filled up and go to the right places to get filled up, it still seems like it doesn't really work. And that's kind of like the first thing I feel or I think of when I think of living on empty. And if in that kind of perspective, I know what it's like to live on empty. But when you hear that title, living on empty, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Well, in context to what you just said, I feel like living on empty for me is my job is media. So I do this every day from 9 to 5. So when it comes to Cherie doing her own art, apart from promoting or supporting another brand, I don't have time for myself. And honestly, if I do move into creating media for Cherie, I feel like I'm coming with an empty cup, which is kind of discouraging because you kind of feel like you've been robbed of like your own creativity because you're using all your creativity for someone else's brand. So, but it's a discipline. I have to keep doing art for Cherie because I'm an artist as well as a creative director. So I think I wrestle with that tension.
Yeah, I feel like we all do as creators and as artists, and I know I do as well. And sometimes I feel like it's because our identity is really wrapped up in what we do. I mean, because honestly, we go by our names. It's like we don't have, specifically you and I, we don't have stage names. It's our actual name that we go by. But our guest today, actually, I had a conversation with him last week, and he has a whole different perspective that gave me a new light on this idea of living on empty. Okay. It's really dope. I met him when I was on tour with KJ52 for many years. He's a super dope drummer, songwriter, author, speaker, leader over at Rest LA, and founder of an organization called Brave Work. I want you guys to welcome to the show my friend, Pedro Latorre, everybody. Give him a round.
Hey.
Pedro.
Hey, I look dressed, but I'm wearing slippers, yo.
Hey, me too, yo.
I'm wearing slippers.
No, the question is, do you have pants on?
Oh, I mean, yes, I do.
Oh, man, how you over there in this COVID-19 lockdown situation, bro?
Doing good, man. Doing good. It's crazy how fast the rhythms and the routines can get annoying, like doing laundry and eating, like things that you got to do to keep going. But keep it in perspective. There's people fighting on the front lines and trying to stay alive right now. So overall thankful. And we're just trucking along.
Dope, man. I'm super excited to have you on this because every time we have a conversation, I'm just like, man, the mic needs to be on. Like, we really need to be talking about this. And we got on this topic of something that you've created with your organization, Brave Work, which we want to talk a lot more about that on this show. But this topic and this idea of living on empty, I had a different perspective when I think of that title, but what we talked about, you shared a very interesting viewpoint on that. And I would love to have you kind of share some of your stories and perspectives of what led you to think of it that way.
Well, yeah, it was a quote, I think ideas can be really disruptive. And I stumbled across this quote by this guy named Don Harold. And it says, unhappiness is not knowing what you want and killing yourself to get it. And many years ago, that quote was so disruptive to my life. And disruptive doesn't necessarily just mean bad. Like, we actually look up the idea behind disruption, and it means innovative. It actually doesn't mean that it's bad, inherently bad. So this idea hits me of, man, am I living from some sort of success marker that I've defined or that culture's defined? Am I living for somebody else's version of success, or am I living for my own? And after many years of chasing a lot of different things, trying a lot of different things, and I learned some amazing things along the way, I began to have this restlessness, I call it the cosmic questions, like, what am I here for? And what is God trying to do in my life, and all of those things. And so now this like living on empty thing, oh man, I mean, we could talk all day. I won't do it because it'll bore all of your listeners and your community. But the heart of it, if I just like boiled it down to a simple idea, is that I believe some of the greatest people in the world continually have learned the art of emptying themselves. And emptying just means letting go of all the things you think are going to satisfy you, even good things. It's letting everything go. It's being still. It's being curious, right? And it's being brave. And in that space, when you can be still and you can be curious about, why do I do that? Why do I say that? Why am I hungry for that? Why did I just tell that person that I know that person? What is that thing inside of me? And imagine a community of people having those conversations, emptying themselves continually so that they can see what is worth being and doing. If you get those two things out of order, I believe you'll mess up your whole life, because I've done it. So I've done it on an average Monday, and I've done it for stretches of years of my life where I was so focused on doing things instead of what was I actually pursuing? Who am I trying to become? And it was like the sound of that phone right there. It's like,
right. Dude, like, you have to unpack that a little. First of all, can you say that quote one more time?
Yeah, the act of emptying ourselves continually so that we can see what is worth being and worth doing.
Got you. So unpack that a little bit more for us. So, like, how do you do that? How do you empty yourself of something? Like, what caused you to even get there to do that?
Being tangled, got me there. So mess, feeling like Christmas lights that came out of a box from the year before, like you never wind them up right because you're in a hurry to get them, put them away and celebrate New Year's. And so when you have a soul that feels tangled, your mind, will, and emotions feel tangled. After long enough time, you just go, I can't do this anymore. And it's funny, like, let's use that analogy. How do you untangle Christmas lights? Well, you have to be really still. You have to go really slow, because the faster you go, the more it tangles. And so, I think it's different for everybody. I don't think my description of my life will be a prescription for somebody else's, but I think there are some common things. I think stillness is a common thing. We have to pursue stillness. We have to be still. Jesus, in the midst of all his craziness, he got still. You could look at Gandhi. You could look at Martin Luther King. You could look at Mother Teresa. All of them got still, and in stillness, they began to see, kind of like water. You put mud in water and you shake it up, you can't see anything. Well, how do you see again? Well, you can empty the water and you can get the mud out and you can put new water in. Well, we can't do that with our soul. We don't know how to do that. So how do we do it? We get still, and the mud begins to fall, and we get clarity on who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do. For us as believers, I believe the gospel defines that with clarity. But stillness, nonetheless, is a piece to seeing the mess that's in our lives with clarity.
Well, Pedro, I know you are a great storyteller, so I want you to make it personal right now. Tell me a story in your life that really happened where you went through this process you're talking about right now.
Oh, Jesus. Well, I wasn't ready for that. I knew Cherie would pull something out of me. So good at it. Okay, that's fair. Yeah. So I was flown to Portland, Oregon by a mutual friend that we all know, by Derek Hoyne. And
he was on last week.
Me out.
Yeah.
Yes. So Derek flew me out. I was in the middle of playing drums for KJ52, and Derek flew me out, long story short, to this conference, this event that was happening. And it was kind of all around like sharing the gospel and evangelism and all these different things. Like, I think you should come. I feel like you're supposed to be there. And I was like, cool. And I was in this season of feeling tangled. And so I'm touring, I'm running a nonprofit organization, speaking in public schools. I was thinking about writing a book. You know, I got all these ambitions like many of us do. We're hungry, we're trying, we're working. And I had this little blip of radar on my schedule. And so I go to this event, and while I'm there, I began to just have this stirring feeling inside of me that I wanted to live for something bigger than my own goals and dreams. Like, I've been around heroes in the faith. I've been around heroes in business, and many of them are older, obviously, than me, and they don't seem satisfied. They don't seem like they hit the mark. They don't seem like they hit the bullseye. And there seems to be this angst in them at 50, 60, 70 years old. And I'm like, I don't want to end up there. And I feel like I'm on the path to get there if I'm not careful. So I was on a flight back. And mind you, coming from an evangelistic conference, and I remember saying this under my breath. And I was like, if I don't get first class, I'm going to be so mad. If I don't get upgraded, I'm going to be so mad.
Wow,
and it seems like
Devo.
I was such a diva. I was so tired. I had a red-eye flight back into Florida from Portland. And I end up on this plane in the middle seat. This is the worst seat. It's the seat you don't want to be on. And I end up in the middle seat, and I sit next to this lady, and she pours out her whole life. I listen for hours. And the whole time in the back of my mind, I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm being Jesus right now. I'm so cool. This is so amazing. And I felt so good. I share the gospel with her, and we're landing in Atlanta, because you got to go Atlanta, you know, into Florida. And we're landing in Atlanta, and I look at her name's Mary, and I look at Mary, and I say, Mary, I believe God put me in this seat today to share the hope of Jesus with you. And I don't know much, but what I do know is that God raised me, and he loves me, and he loves you. And in this moment, I was like, dude, I'm winning. This is it. I've made it. This is why God put me on this trip. I know it now. And she just looks at me with the sweetest eyes and kind of tears in her eyes. We had some really weighty conversations. And she just said, I just can't believe Jesus is the only way and the only truth and the only life. I just think there's got to be other paths and other people that I can. And I was just like wrecked. First of all, I'm like, if I would have known you weren't going to accept Jesus, I would have gone to sleep on this point. I'm tired. I got work I got to do. You know, I'm being 100% honest, right? And believe it or not, that moment showed me that my deeper entanglement, my deeper thing that I was dealing with in life, is that I didn't love people the way that Jesus loved me. Is that I didn't know how to love people sacrificially. Is that I wanted first class more than I wanted important conversations. That I wanted, you know, better seating more than I cared about sharing the gospel that has saved my life eternally with other human beings. And it kind of felt messy. It felt like somebody had shaken the cup and the mud was going everywhere. And I was like, oh, I don't like what I'm seeing in myself. And God's grace met me in that. I wrote a book about it called The Middle Seat, Stop Craving Platforms, Start Loving People. And it was this whole season of just extreme disruption around like, what is that? Why do I care more about a green room than I care about the gospel? If I'm being honest, like really honest.
Yeah.
And there's my mess. I just aired it all out right there for you.
So what do you think? I mean, so you're in those positions all the time. And like, now that you want to, you're tired, you're playing drums, you fly out to this, event, and then you have to take a red eye back home. You think that you're, doing the right thing and sharing Jesus with people, and they don't, it seems that to me, like that's kind of living on empty. But at the same time, what you were talking about beforehand is like, what made you come to the realization? Like, I'm trying to think, I'm really thinking about that story you told me before at this show, when you were playing the drums, that really helped you to realize like, it's even in doing all of that still kind of, you're still operating out of your own strength instead of operating out of the strength that God has given you. Can you share some other experiences of like actually being on the road?
It all comes back to ego. It all comes back to the problem within myself. And I was on the drum kit, and I'm playing for KJ52. I think you, George, might have been at this show as well.
I vaguely remember this. It was in Virginia. I think it was.
We're at this outdoor amphitheater, thousands of people, it goes upward, and so you're just doing your thing, and you're in the pocket, you're just feeling great. And I remember bouncing around. There's video footage of it somewhere. I looked like a little nerd. I had a big old fro. And I remember it was one of my first big shows with KJ. I'd played like a 300 or 400 people thing. And in his world, like this was like the first like fly day big show. And I was like really kind of overwhelmed and excited and nervous and all that. And I remember playing, and I continually I would do a fill, I'd look over side stage to see if the other bands and other artists like saw how dope that was. And then I would mess up a little bit in the middle of playing, and then I would look over the other side of the stage and see if and this was a pattern in my life for many years, if I'm being really honest. I remember playing and doing shows with Group One crew and having Toby Mac's team, Byron Chambers and B. Haley looking at me, and Byron laid down the drums on the Group One crew music. And so I was nervous. I'm like, this dude's the one who did this. And I was messing it up so bad. It was so ugly. But I was looking side stage for approval. And so at the heart of this emptying thing is being able to articulate that you're looking somewhere else for approval, that you're chasing some other version. Now, I believe as believers, if we don't empty that, if we don't come to God with that and go, hey, I'm looking side stage. Now that's a metaphor now, right? We all look side stage in some space. Like I'm looking side stage at approval and affirmation, and I shouldn't be getting it from anybody else. Now, they may say, you're awesome, you're dope, that was awesome, or you need some work, whatever the situation. But I need to be looking to God for that, ultimately, to find my deeper sense of purpose, and so I can stay anchored.
That's interesting. I think what you're alluding to is a couple things. You're talking about you're ministering, and then you're recognizing while you're ministering the mess that's within your own soul. And so I have a question. How do you deal with the mess? Because I don't personally, there are times where there's been times in my life where I have been ministering or singing or doing whatever I want, whatever I'm doing. And then after the show or after the set, I just feel so icky. And I'm like, why do I feel icky? And I don't want to have to deal with it. And so I try to suppress it. And so what are some things you do to look that mess in the face and deal with it?
Man, Cherie, you always ask the best questions.
Hey, it's real though.
Yeah, I don't want to give a trite answer. Okay. I don't want to give a pithy answer. I don't want to give that thing. So I'm gonna be honest. Okay. I think we have to, at the core of it, we have to know that God already saw it before we did.
Okay.
When we know that and we realize he gave me the stage, he gave me the microphone, he gave me the lyrics, he gave me the opportunity, he let me do the record, he let me do the promo, all that, when he already saw the mess that was inside of me, and he still gave us the space to fail, or to try, or to kind of get it, or to succeed. He gave me the space, even though, as a father, I have a 4-year-old son, and that for me, I understand that. There's times I got to give my son some space to try some things that I know I'm going to be like, oh, he's going to fall, he's going to get hurt. He doesn't know what he doesn't know, Right. Jumping on the couch is a great example. Don't jump on the couch. You're going to get hurt. It's going to bounce you a way that you can't control. And he did it the other day. He hit his head on the window. And I'm like, son, you can't. And he's just like, but Dad, it's fun. But Dad, I won't get hurt. It's like, yeah, well, you will, but it's okay. I'm going to be here. Dad's here. And if it gets bad, we'll go to emergency room. But I'm here. And I think ultimately, at the simplest basic answer I can give is when we know that God loves us, when we really know that we're loved by a father. There's a saying that some friends of mine said over at Bethel one time when I was out on the road, and they said, when a father's in the room, there's no room for failure. And when you know your dad's in the room, he's giving you the space to try stuff. Go for it. I don't know. Go for it, man. Try it. And he's like, you fall and you get hurt, and you see the mess and you see the entanglement of your soul, and you're like, dang it, why would he ever let me do this? And he's like, oh, because I needed you to see that I'm the only thing that can really satisfy you at the end anyway. So I let you try that so you could hit bottom, so you could realize I'll meet you at bottom, and then we can go where we're supposed to go. it's part of the human condition. We have to get a little messy so that we can see what is worth being and what is worth doing.
That's good.
Man, that's absolutely really good. And I think that's the crux of it. And I feel like we always have to fall back to this. Like when it comes to living on empty, it really is living in the emptiness of ourselves, our desire, our egos. I mean, if we really want to have that solution, I think it's amazing to be able to just like take a step back and realize like this needs to be fixed. And the only way to fix that, if we're to boil it down, is like we have to really check our egos. We have to really check our motivations, really check our desires. Do we need the words of affirmation from man? Or do we need that affirmation from the word of affirmation from the word? Like that's really where, if we don't find that as artists, we'll find ourselves continuously pouring out and giving of ourselves and finding fulfillment in all these other things. But what we do is, and this is where I see the impact is in our culture. We think that we continuously do that. And since we do find our fulfillment in the praise and accolades of other people, in awards and sales and likes, comments, shares, all that stuff, we might get those things. And we may be really talented and we might get those things and find our success in those things. And I think it's even more dangerous to find success, because then we find success and affirmation and all those things. And if they're gone, then we identify with that. But the difference is, and when we realize that we don't need our words of affirmation coming from outside. We get our words of affirmation coming from the word of God, coming from God's word, from our creator, living empty of ourselves, our flesh. We're able to live out of the fullness of our relationship with God. And living out of that fullness of our relationship with God, we realize that, yes, if he's given us talent, we might get those praises and you're dope and all that type of stuff. But we're not swayed by that. And we're not saying, in the same sense as all the people that are leaving comments down here, and we're on the internet. So you have no idea what people are going to say. And when people say something, crazy and judgmental or, completely wrong about you, you're not swayed about that either. We can have that security and foundation in the word of God when we completely live on emptying out ourselves. And I really love that perspective that you brought to this whole scenario. And it's similar to what we talked about before, because it always comes back to the same thing. If we're not living our lives and motivations coming out of our relationship with Christ, then no matter what kind of success we have, it's all going to end up being empty.
And as performers and entertainers, I think an artist, you have to navigate putting your art out there in a very vulnerable way and emptying yourself. You have to navigate that people will have responses, opinions, comments, likes or dislikes. At the end of the day, once you're off the stage, though, you're by yourself. And that's where I think identity, and that's kind of what I hear George getting to, is like, what is your identity? Is it in your art? Is it in your creativity? Or is it in God, the Father, the Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit? Are you a daughter? Are you a son? And I think when you can be at ease in that identity, I am a daughter for myself of God, and I can have him speak to me and fill me back up. I think that's important. I had a vision while you were talking, Pedro, of learning to ride a bike, right? You get on the bike and you fall off, you get on the bike and you fall off, and eventually you'll get the hang of it. But there's a lot of falls, and I feel like God knows that, like what you're saying. Like, I think at the end of the day, though, he's asking us to keep getting up.
Wow.
And to keep desiring for his presence to be close. Like, are you there, Dad? Are you there? No matter how good we get as well, that we still want him.
That's crazy that you just said that. You don't know how crazy that is, because the other day I was on a call with somebody, and I did this interview thing with this organization in Nashville, and they said, what do you feel like the number one thing is you've learned in this season? And I said, I'm far more like a bike than I ever knew. That was my answer. I've never shared that publicly. And it just, this quarantine has taught me this. And they were like, what do you mean by that? I'm like, I'm realizing I need something more than ever. My soul needs something more than ever to lean up against. And God to the world looks like this little piece of metal called a kickstand that's so insignificant. But God is perfectly positioned himself in my life, both through his act, his love and reach on my life, and me just choosing to rest on him. And I think that's the whole sum of brave work. Like at the end of the day, like being brave is not about attempting big things, because the greatest thing you'll ever conquer is yourself. It is by far going to be you. The greatest race you'll ever run is from here to here. The greatest thing you'll ever struggle with is looking back at you in the mirror every single day. Because I've seen people get the applause of millions of people every single year, and still behind closed doors go, I don't know who I am. I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? Look at you. Look what you
watch this footage.
But if we wait for the things that we do to speak life over us, we have to realize that in the process of doing things, you get burnout and you get tired. So if you're looking for identity in the things you're doing, you're not going to find it. It's not there. But if you can work from your identity, Cherie, what you're talking about, if you can realize you need a kickstand, you need to lean up against something.
Yes.
You need to put your whole weight on something. And if it's on your career, I'll do that. At some point, somebody can kick that thing out from underneath of you. In the comment section or in reality, you will time out, because that's just real life. You have a shelf life. I have a shelf life. But in the kingdom, we don't have a shelf life, because we're sons and daughters. That don't have a shelf life. That will never expire. And long after I'm done on a stage or done on a microphone, I have a father who will continue to look at me and say, you're mine.
Yeah.
Bro, man, Pedro, thank you so much for joining us today, bro. Like it never fails to have a conversation where I'm just more encouraged in my faith and like have new perspective on life going forward, man. So thank you for what you do. We're definitely will point people over to Brave Work and what you do. Also, if you haven't gotten a copy of The Middle Seat, make sure you go check that out. Find that on Amazon or on PedroLatorre.com. It's PedroLatorre. Is it .com or .info?
.com. You
.com. Yeah, it is.
Nailed it. Home run.
Old website.
I love you guys. Y'all the best.
Hey, thanks again, man, for joining us. Appreciate it, man. We'll see you guys soon. So, man, Cherie, like thinking about this whole idea of living on empty, you know, from the beginning of it, thinking about, you know, we're pouring out ourselves and, you know, can't find that place. Like, I don't know, what's your perspective of thinking about after this conversation?
I was reminded of how identity is such a big part of it. I think oftentimes I get lost personally, trying to know who I am. And I put a lot of titles on myself, or I'll let other people put titles on me. And then what happens is I feel like I have to live up to those titles. And sometimes those expectations I can't reach. So then I feel like I'm a failure, you know, and then that creates that emptiness. And that's a negative type of emptiness. But I think the emptiness that we're after is, God, I'm going to, like what Pedro's getting to, I'm laying down all my expectations, all my titles, all that stuff. And I'm going to let you speak to me what you want. And so I think it's the emptying of yourself so that God can speak. And so recently, my dad, I'm going to host a podcast with him. And he asked me what my title was. And I didn't necessarily have a title. And so he made one up for me. And he said, you're an urban activist. And I said, Dad, that's it. Like, I could never have come up with that. Like, activist isn't really it. Like, you know, I mean, there's people call themselves activists. I am that. But there's something when he put urban in front of it, because that's what my passion is urban, you know, culture, cities, like urban youth workers, all these urban things. Yeah. And then when he put urban activists in front of it, I was like, yeah, that's what I've actually been for most of my life. And it coming from my dad, I'm wearing that like a badge. I'm like, I'm an urban because my dad said it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so that could be better than any title I can make up. And so that was cool to not give an answer when he asked me. And then he gave it to me. And that was better than what I could have come up with. Man, you sitting here starting to preach. It's like, because it's nothing like what the words of the Father says you are. When your Father says who you are, you wear it like a badge. Yes. And that's one thing I think about when we talk about this idea of living on empty. It is understanding what our Father has told us, who we are. But in order to do that, there's a PDF that actually Pedro has blessed us to be able to provide for free to those in the Jam the Hype Society. Okay. And he talks about these three things. I want to pull that PDF up, where one of the things he talked about was to be still.
to realize all this murkiness that's in your life and cloudiness. Sometimes you just need to be still.
Yep.
Let all the dust settle so you can see clear. And I think that one of the best things that has happened from this whole COVID-19 lockdown situation, where you have to come off the road and maybe you're not as busy as you used to be, you have to stay in one space. If you allow God to just use this time to allow you just to be still. A lot of times we get into these still situations in our American go-getter, grind till I die type mentality, we get even more frantic and get even less clarity. But when you take this time to say, you know, I'm just going to be still. I'm going to stop listening to all the chaos that's going around me and let that murkiness settle to the ground. It gives us time to be clear. Then he says, be curious. And I think asking those questions, why do I do that? Why do I say it this way? And you have to ask those questions of why, because when you know who you are and you know where you come from and why you do what you do, you're able to understand your identity a lot better, kind of like what you were just saying. So be still, be curious, and then be brave, because there's a lot of things that are in us that are unique to us. And when you let the dust settle and you start to ask your questions why, and you start to understand who you are, why you do things, and what you're actually called to do, what your purpose is, your purpose may challenge somebody else's perspective. And it may not get the most comments, it may not get the most likes, and it may not be the most popular thing to say, especially as a believer in our modern culture. But when you allow God to really tell you who you are and you wear that badge of identity of what the Father says about you, we need to go out and to be brave and do the work that God has called us to do. So if you're a part of the Jam the Hype Society, we have this PDF from Brave Work from Pedro that we can send to you for free. If you want this PDF, you want to join the Jam the Hype Society, make sure you shoot me an email to jamthehype@uiwi.org, because I want to give this out to you, because this was one of the more important conversations that we could have during this time.
Yep, this is our second episode, Jam the Hype fam. So if you haven't noticed yet, we're not, we're not going soft on topics. We're getting into some things, and these conversations are prompters for you then to start to think deeper about your ministry, about your art, about who you are, in the view of your Father. All right. So if you enjoyed this or want to share this with other people who need to hear conversations like this, I want you to like, subscribe, comment, and share this video.
Yeah, that helps with the whole algorithm and everything.
Yeah,
and also coming up on Tuesdays, I'm going to go on live to do a Q&A session. I try to keep up with the Q&As here, but I definitely want to talk back with you one-on-one on Tuesdays. So on Tuesdays, we got 2 artists from the Jam the Hype Society that will be interviewing on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern time, wherever you are in your world. You figured out what time that is. But we're going to go live on Instagram and do a talk back Q&A. So I invite you to join us over there on Instagram at Jam the Hype.
Yep. And if you have any suggestions for guests that you want us to bring on, go ahead and message us, DM us. We are open to who you feel are people who are leaders and artists. That's the people we're trying to bring on here, thought leaders. So go ahead and give us a message, and we will be back next week as well with another episode. We are episode 3. Follow along.
Yeah, and if you are one of those leaders, if you're a creator that desires to use your art and your influence to influence this modern culture to live a life transformed by the gospel of Jesus, we want to invite you to join us at the Jam the Hype Society as well. So again, just shoot me an email, jamthehype@uiwi.org, and I'll hook you up with all the info. So until next week, we'll see y'all then. Peace.